Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And these are the beginning of rows. Two who began from the middle of the row, this one facing north and this one facing south, and they forgot before them and behind them. That before them is Shikha and that behind them is not Shikha. If one began from the beginning of the row and he forgot before him and behind him, that before him is not Shikha and that behind him is Shikha, because you shall not go back applies to it. This is the general rule. Whatever is included in you shall not go back is Shikha. When it is not included in you shall not go back is not Shikha.
Right. And we said an easier way perhaps to understand it is like if you've passed it, if you actually physically walked past it and left it behind, that's called Baltashov. You're not allowed to go back to it. But if you never were there, then that's not called Baltashov.
Let's write this over here. Okay. Okay. Hey. Two sheaves, shikha, but three are not shikha. Two heaps of olives and carobs, shikha, but three are not shikha. Two flax stalks, shikha, but three are not shikha. Two grapes, peret, and three are not peret. Two ears of corn, lechet, but three are not lechet. These are according to Beis Hillel. And regarding all of them, Beis Shammai says three for the poor and four for the owner. A sheaf which contains two sa'as, and he forgot it, is not shicha. But sheaves which contain two sa'as, Rabbi Gamil says to the owner, but the Chachamim say to the poor. Rabbi Gamil said, does the greater number of sheaves strengthen or weaken the rights of the owner? They said to him, his rights are strengthened. He said to them, but if one sheaf contains two sa'ah, which was forgotten and not shicha, then two sheaves containing two sa'ah should certainly not be shicha. They said to him, no, if you said to regarding one sheaf, for it is as a heap, will you say so in the case of two sheaves, which are bundles?
Okay. All right. Um, all right, Zain. Kama sheyesh basasayim. So if you have standing grain that has the quantity of two se'ah, and he forgot that, that's also not shikha. So here we're also learning that shikha can apply to standing grain as well as to cut grain. Okay, and but if the quantity of grain is again that two se'ah, that's too large of a quantity to be allowed to be shikha. So whether it's standing grain or whether it's cut grain, the two se'ah shear applies. Okay. Ein vasasaim aval hi re'uya lasasaim. If it's like an area of a field that actually doesn't have two se'ah of grain, but that's because the produce itself is inferior quality. But it's in that area you would normally have two se'ah.
Mhm.
Afilu hisha tofach, even if it's like the most tofach is like a very low grade um, a low grade grain. Um, Roino saki'ilu hi anava shel seorium. We view it as if it had been like the fullest largest produce that kind of quality that kind of crop could produce. So even though in reality it doesn't have two sa'ah, but if it had been a good crop, it would have been two sa'ah. That also is not judged to be shecha. Okay. Hakama matzeles es ha'omer ve'es hakama. So standing grain can save an omer, which is cut grain, and ve'es hakama, and also uncut grain. Um, okay, let me read through this and I'll come back and explain. Ha'omer eino matzil lo es ha'omer velo es hakama. However, a heap does not save another heap and it doesn't save standing grain in terms of shikha. Now, how does this work? So what standing grain does save a pile? As long as the standing grain itself is not shikha, even one stalk of it is good enough to save um, to save the standing grain, to save something else, whether it's standing or cut,
Cut.
from being shikha. Now, what's the shear of that is if you could take that grain, if you got a stalk of uncut grain, and you could pull it over to touch the pile, or to touch the other standing grain that had been forgotten, right? Then so that they could be cut, so that just like we saw before, that if they could be cut in one movement, then that saves it from being shecha. So, but of course that grain itself must not be shecha. So if you've got something, so if you've got some standing grain that's not shecha, and you've got either cut or standing grain that is shecha, but you could put them together and cut them in one movement, then the standing grain saves the other shecha.
Okay.
Okay, clear?
Okay. Clear.
Okay. Tes se'ah tevu'ah akura u'se'ah she'ena akura. So now let's say instead of two se'ah, you've got one se'ah of cut grain and one se'ah that is not cut. Okay, v'chein be'ilan. Similarly on a tree, if you've got one se'ah of harvested produce and one se'ah that's still sitting on the tree. V'ashum v'habetzalim. Interesting one over here. Shimon B'Tzalim. We could say that it's a similar thing with in terms of harvested and unharvested produce, but another way of looking at this mission is that since they're two different types of vegetables, so if you have one sa'ah of onions and one sa'ah of garlic, then they also don't combine. Einam mitztarfim l'sar saim. So in all of these cases, they do not join because each one is insignificant in its own right. It's not significant enough to be saved from shicha in its own right, even though together they make up two sa'ah.
But there's a difference. I'm surprised at garlic and onions because a tree is usually a big thing. It's
Mhm.
an olive tree, an apple tree, they're large. And the
Mhm.
olives and the garlic and the onions are these little things growing in the ground. So it's like,
Right. So again, the two sa'ah is a volume measure. Um, so if it's got two sa'ah, then it's saved. However, if it's one sa'ah of garlic and one sa'ah of onions, that doesn't make two sa'ah.
right, okay.
One sa'ah of uncut and one sa'ah of cut does not make two sa'ah. Ela shel aniyim heim. Both of them belong to the aniyim as part of the shecha. Rabbi Yossi Omer, im bas reshus ha'ani be'emtza einan mitztarfin. If in other words, so im lav hare elu mitztarfin. He says that it makes a difference what separates these two piles, these two things. So let's say a sa'ah of uncut and a sa'ah of cut. Now, if there's leket in the middle, says Rabbi Yossi, let's say there's some leket lying in the middle, then and the aniyim therefore are allowed to come in between them to pick up the leket. Now that separates between the two, and therefore they're not mitzvah to sa'ah. However, if there's nothing separating them, then he says, yeah, that's going to go to the Baal Habayis because there's nothing in between them, and one sa'ah of kat will join with one sa'ah of kat. Okay, but the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yossi here.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Dalet Gimel. If a
No, I've actually got Dalit base. Yeah.
Dalet base, so
Yeah.
put it in the place.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Base in the wrong place.
Dalet base.
Mm-hmm.
Dalet base. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something else. What's the matter with me? In the case of suspended vines and palm trees, it is not so. Even 99 say to snatch, and one says to distribute. This one they heed, and for he spoke according to the law.
Right, we said that was because of the danger of allowing the aniyim up into the trees.
He's right.
We make the Baal Habayis get it cut down and then distribute to the aniyim.
If a person took part of the peah and cast it on the rest, he has nothing of it. If he fell upon it or he spread his cloak over it, they remove it from him, and the same applies to gleanings and forgotten sheaf. Peah they do not reap with sickles, nor do they uproot it with spades, lest they strike one another.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sharp implements. And there's competition.
Okay. Gimel Gimel. The carcass of a non-kosher animal anywhere and the carcass of a kosher bird in villages requires thought, but do not require heksha. The carcass of a kosher animal anywhere and the carcass of a kosher bird and kalev in the marketplace requires neither heksha, thought, nor heksha. Reb Shimon says also a camel, hare, hyrax, and a pig. Dill, once it has imparted its flavor to a pot of food, is no longer subject to the laws of truma, and it does not contract tumas oakland. Branch shoots, those of adal, and the leaves of the wild loaf do not contract tumas oakland until they are sweetened. Reb Shimon says also the roots of pakos are like them. Costus, ginger, fragrant herbs, tia, asafoetida, pepper, and safflower loaves may be purchased with money of Maisa Sheni, but they do not contract tumas oakland. They are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said to him, if they may be purchased with Maisa Sheni money, why do they not contract tumas oakland? And if they do not contract tumas oakland, they should also not be purchased with Maisa Sheni money.
Yeah. All right. Okay, mikvahs.
Okay. Hey Vav. If a wave that became separated consisted of 40 sa'ah and it fell on a person or on utensils, they become tahor. In any place that contains 40 sa'ah, one can immerse oneself, and one can immerse things. Hence, one may immerse things in pits or in ditches or in a donkey track that is mingled in the countryside. Beit Shammai says one may immerse things in a river that flows down a mountain. Beit Hillel says one may not immerse anything therein. They agree, however, that one may make an enclosure with utensils and then immerse himself therein. But the utensils themselves used to make the enclosure are not deemed as immersed. Any water that mingles with a mikveh is like the mikveh. In the case of holes in the cave or cracks in the cave, one may immerse something in them, however they are. But in the case of a dugout under a cave, one may not immerse anything in it unless there is an opening in the size of a water skin tube.
Right, so now I think it's going to be important to look at the diagram of this one to understand what's the difference between the cracks on the side and the dugouts on the bottom.
Right.
Have you got your
I have,
diagrams there?
right. So the one is the dugout beneath and the hole on the side of the mikvah.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Yehuda says, when is this so? When it supports itself. But if it does not support itself, one may immerse something in it, however it is. If a bucket was full of utensils and one immersed themselves, they become tahor. But if they did not need to immerse it, then the waters are not considered mingled unless they mingle as much as the size of a water skin tube.
Right. Okay, that size of the water skin tube is going to be a shear that we're going to see a lot of.
A lot of later on, right?
Mm-hmm. Kalim, base dalid.
A lantern. Now we have diagrams here too. A lantern that has a receptacle for oil is tame, while if it does not have such a receptacle, it is tahor. A potter's form, a potter's form which he begins with is tahor, while the one which he finishes is tame. A funnel of householders is tahor, while the peddlers of tame, while that of peddlers is tame, since it is used for measurement. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bitzara. Rabbi Akiva says, since it tilts it on its side and allows the buyer to smell the contents.
So that's what makes it into a kli, even though even though it's got holes on both sides, but he turns it on its side in order to hold things.
Right.
So you can smell it. So therefore, it does function as a container, and and it can become tame.
I mean, they both have a lip around them.
Mm-hmm.
In the picture that I have, they both have a lip around the top.
Right, but if it's got a hole in the bottom, it's not a container.
Yeah, because right, it's not right. The cover of wine jugs and of oil jugs and the cover of the Aryan barrels are tahor. But if it was prepared for some use, they are tame. The cover of a stew pot, when it has a hole in it or it has a protrusion, it is tahor. If it does not have a hole in it or no protrusion, it is tame. Since she strains the vegetables into it. Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok says, since he overturns the mass of cooked vegetables upon it. A gestera that was found in a kill before its manufacture was complete is tahor. So after its manufacture was complete, it is tameh. A titros,
So that's a shard. So if something has been broken, so if
right.
if it broke from inside the kiln, it never was a kli. So therefore, it doesn't have the tumor. But if it was something that broke after it had been fired, then it was a kli before and it broke. And now you've got to look at those measurements. Like can this shard hold something in it? And we look at those questions.
Right.
Okay.
A titros Reb Eliezer and Bazadik says it's tahor. Reb Yossi
What's a
says
tetras?
is like a almost like a vase, but it's big at the bottom and goes up to the top. It's thin, right? And
Okay.
that's what I have here. And there's a hole in the top. Can I see a picture? Or this is
Yeah, yeah. Show us the picture. Right. Okay. So that's the thing that they use for this for sprinkling, right? For they use the vacuum to basically they would fill it up with and and hold his thumb over the top to hold the water inside, and then he would take it over the plants and he would remove his thumb and it would start sprinkling over the plants.
that's, so this was our first sprinkler.
Yeah.
Right. Reb Eliezer and Zadok rules a tahor. Reb Rossi rules a tome since it lets out liquid drop by drop.
Okay.
Was that
Right.
three?
That's three.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Baba Basra, Base Zion.
One must distance a tree 25 amot from a town. In the case of carob or sycamore trees, 50 amot. Abashul says any non-fruit bearing tree requires 50 amot. If the town was there first, he cuts down the tree and does not pay compensation. But if the tree was there first, he cuts it down and pays compensation. If there is doubt whether this one was first or that one, he cuts it down and does not pay compensation. One must distance a fixed threshing floor 50 amot from a town. One may not establish a fixed threshing floor within his own property unless he owns 50 cubits of land in every direction, and he must distance it from the plantings of his neighbor and from his plow over areas so that it should not damage them. One must distance carcasses, graves, and a tannery 50 amot from a town. One may establish a tannery only to the east of a town. Rabbi Akiva says he may establish it in any direction except to the west, and he must distance it 50 amot.
Because if you have right, the winds do come from different directions. So why dafka from the east or just not from the west? Because I was just thinking because the west wind. I think the west wind is the west wind is a sea wind.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a little gentler. I mean, we know what the east wind is like because we get it a lot over here.
Right.
It's hot and dry.
It said this is. Oh, I'm sorry. It said this because an east wind is ordinarily a gentle wind, which is not strong enough to carry the odor of the town to the town from that distance. Only when divine retribution has been decreed upon an area down does the east wind blow strongly. Others explain that it is rare for there to be an east wind in all in the mid east where this law was stated. Thus, the likely direction for any order to be carried from. It says that's it.
Interesting. I mean, if a strong east wind is a sign of divine retribution against an area, we're in trouble over here.
And I was thinking the same thing. According to what Akiva says, it says prayers are said facing westward, since that direction is in which the divine presence manifests itself most directly. Therefore, it would be profanity to place the tannery with the foul odor on that side of the town. So as I said, although today we actually pray facing eastward, that is because the temple site in Yerushalayim is to our east, and Yerushalayim, though the temple is located on the west side of the city.
Okay. Shkalim Vav Base.
I also would not like to live above a bakery, so that's.
Oh, yeah, that would be terrible. That would be like a recipe for like becoming overweight very fast.
Where we used to live, but not here, but before that, every time you had to walk to shul, like Yom Kippur, all right, you had to pass the bakery. There was no way you couldn't go around it without really extending your time walking, and it was a terrible thing, really. So anyway, okay, all right. Vav base. It once happened that a Kohen who was occupied at his task noticed that a certain stone on the floor was different from the others. He came to tell his colleagues, but before he had concluded the matter, his soul departed from him. Thus, they knew with certainty that the ark had been hidden there. And
okay. So he discovered this place, and Hashem didn't want him to reveal it.
Right. And where did they prostrate themselves these 13 times? Four in the north, four in the south, three in the east, and two in the west, opposite the 13 gates. The southern gate, adjacent to the west, the upper gate, the kindling gate, the firstlings gate, the water gate. And why was it called the water gate? Because through it they would bring the flagon of water for the libation on Sukkot. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov says, through it the waters trickle and they are destined to issue forth from beneath the threshold of the temple. Opposite these southern gates in the north, adjacent to the west, Yakana's gate, the offering gate, the women's gate, the music gate. And why was it called Yakana's gate? Because through it King Yakana went to his exile. In the east, Nicanor's gate, which had two wickets, one to the right and one to the left, and two gates in the west, which were unnamed. 13 tables were in the temple. 8 of marble were in the slaughter area upon which they would rinse the entrails, and um, two were to the west of the altar's ramp, one of marble, one of silver. Upon the marble one they would put the limbs of the offerings, upon the silver the utensils for the service. Two were inside the antechamber near the temple doorway, one of marble, one of gold, and upon the marble one they would put the panim bread when it was brought in, and upon the golden one when it was taken out. For regarding sanctified objects we ascend, but do not descend. And one of gold on the inside of the temple upon which the panim bread lay continually.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Done.
you know, it was very nice list. I mean, your share was nice too, but I was saying the program that they had